Imagine a world without walls, streets, or a single permanent home. For the vast majority of our time on Earth, this was the world of our ancestors. We were a scattered, wandering species living in small, mobile groups. Our lives were dictated by the seasons and the migrations of the animals we hunted. We were nomads, people who moved from place to place, with possessions limited to what could be carried. Our sense of belonging wasn't tied to a place, but to our kin. It was a precarious life, a constant dance on the edge of survival. Then something changed. It wasn't a single event, but a slow, creeping revolution that would fundamentally rewrite the human story. Over thousands of years, our ancestors made a choice, or perhaps were forced into one that would chain them to the land. But in doing so, paved the way for civilization itself. They stopped wandering and started building. This is the story of one of the most important decisions our species has ever made. It's the story of how tiny, scattered camps grew into the first permanent villages, and how those villages, against all odds, swelled into the first bustling cities. It's the story of the dawn of society, a transformation that laid the foundation for everything we know today, from trade and government to the very device you're watching this on. So what sparked this incredible change? It all started with the end of a world. Roughly 12,000 years ago, the Great Ice Age, a period of immense cold that had gripped the planet for millennia, began to loosen its hold. As glaciers retreated and temperatures rose, the very landscape of the Earth was reborn. Where there was once frozen tundra, lush, fertile zones began to emerge. It was a moment of huge opportunity, but also a crisis. The old ways of life, perfectly adapted to a frozen world, just weren't viable anymore. For the hunter-gatherer bands roaming these new, greener lands, life was a paradox of abundance and scarcity. They were masters of their environment, yet utterly at its mercy. Their diet was varied, but their food supply was never guaranteed. The constant search for food, the vulnerability to predators, the exposure to the elements, it was a life of relentless uncertainty. So what changed? What allowed people to finally settle down? And how did we go from wandering clans to the architects of the first cities? Our story begins in a sweeping arc of land in the Middle East, we now call the Fertile Crescent. Bounded by the Mediterranean Sea to the west and the Persian Gulf to the east, this area became a cradle of innovation as the climate warmed. Here, wild grasses, the ancestors of modern wheat and barley, grew in dense, plentiful stands. In this region, particularly in the Levant, a fascinating culture emerged around 12,000 BCE, the Natufians. The Natufians were still hunter-gatherers, but they were doing something revolutionary. The sheer abundance of wild grains, nuts, and animal life in their territory allowed them to do something previously unthinkable: stay in one place for most of the year. They began to build semi-permanent settlements, clusters of circular homes with stone foundations. They became some of the first humans to experiment with a sedentary lifestyle, long before true farming began. Archaeologists have found evidence of their villages, like the one at Jericho, where people lived by a reliable spring. They developed new tools, like sickles with flint blades for harvesting wild grains and grinding stones to process them. They weren't yet farmers in the true sense. They were still gathering what nature provided, but they were tethered to the land in a new way. They were learning the rhythms of a single location, gathering possessions and forming larger, more stable communities than their nomadic ancestors ever could. This was a profound psychological shift. For the first time, the concept of home as a permanent place started to take shape. But this new lifestyle also brought new pressures. A larger, settled population needed a more reliable food source than just gathering wild plants. As the climate kept fluctuating, with droughts threatening their wild grain supplies, the Natufians and their descendants faced a choice: go back to the nomadic life or find a way to control their food supply. They were standing on the edge of what might be the single greatest invention in human history. The switch to farming wasn't a single, aha, moment. It was a slow, almost accidental process, likely driven by observation and need over generations. Maybe someone noticed that seeds dropped near the settlement sprouted into new plants. Maybe, during a lean year, a clan experimented with deliberately planting the seeds they had stored. Whatever the specific trigger, around 10,000 BCE, communities across the Fertile Crescent began to actively cultivate plants. This was the Neolithic Revolution, and it changed everything. The first crops were the very ones their ancestors had gathered for millennia: einkorn and emmer wheat and barley. At sites like Tel Abu Hurira in modern Syria, archaeologists have traced this transition. For a long time, the villagers hunted gazelle and gathered wild grains. Then, around 9,700 BCE, the evidence shows a clear shift to cultivating those same grains. At the same time, humans began a new relationship with animals. Instead of just hunting wild sheep, goats, and cattle, they started managing herds, selectively breeding them for traits like calmness and meat production. Incredibly, all domestic cattle today likely descend from as few as 80 wild aurochs tamed in the Near East. This combination of plant and animal domestication was a winning formula. It created a food source that was, for the first time, relatively stable and predictable. It meant a community no longer had to move with the seasons. They could stay put, invest in the land, and build something permanent. The most significant consequence of this revolution was the food surplus. For the first time, a community could produce more food than it needed just to get by. And this surplus, this was the key to everything. It meant not everyone had to be a farmer or a herder. It could support a growing population and free up people to pursue other tasks. The problem of a precarious nomadic existence had found its solution in agriculture. Humans traded the freedom of the hunt for the security of the harvest. And that decision would set them on a path they could never have imagined, a path leading directly to the gates of the first cities. In a sun-drenched oasis in the Jordan Valley stands the ancient mound of Tel Es Sultan, the site of Jericho, one of the earliest continuously inhabited places in the world. Here, we see the first dramatic proof of what a community could do once it was anchored by agriculture. Around 8,000 BCE, Jericho was more than a collection of huts. It was a town of up to 2,000 or 3,000 people, living in circular mud brick houses. What makes Jericho so astounding for this period isn't just its size, but its architecture. The inhabitants built a massive stone wall, over 13 feet high in places. Just inside this wall, they erected a stone tower, nearly 28 feet tall, with an internal staircase of 22 steps. As far as we know, it's the first large-scale stone monument in human history. Its construction would have been a massive undertaking, requiring immense cooperation and an estimated 100,000 hours of labor. For decades, archaeologists had debated the purpose of these structures. Were they for military defense? While no evidence of a major war has been found from this time, the walls certainly would have protected the town's precious grain and water supply from rivals. Other theories suggest the wall was a defense against flash floods. More recent research points to a symbolic purpose. Archaeologists Rand Barkai and Roy Liron used computer models to reconstruct the sunsets over Jericho 10,000 years ago. They found that on the summer solstice, the shadow of a nearby mountain would fall directly on the tower first, before covering the whole village. Barkai argues the tower was a powerful symbol, linking the earth and heavens, built to create awe and inspire a sense of community. It was a monument designed to convince people to commit to the harder, more regimented life of farming and social living. Regardless of its exact purpose, defense, flood control, or cosmic calendar, the Tower of Jericho is a testament to a new level of social organization. It proves these early farmers were capable of long-term planning, sophisticated engineering, and massive communal effort. They were no longer just a loose collection of families. They were a town with a shared identity and the ability to shape their world for a common goal. This was a critical step on the road to cities. Far to the north, on the Konya plain of modern-day Turkey, lies the ruins of another, even larger Neolithic settlement, Çatalhöyük. Occupied between roughly 7,400 and 5,700 BCE, Çatalhöyük represents a different, and maybe even more complex, experiment in early urban living. At its peak, this sprawling community may have housed up to 8,000 people, making it one of the largest and most sophisticated settlements of its time. But the most striking thing about Çatalhöyük? It was a city without streets. The mud brick houses were built right up against one another in a dense, honeycomb-like cluster. There were no ground-level doors. The only way into a home was through an opening in the roof, reached by a wooden ladder. The rooftops themselves formed the communal space of the village, the walkways, plazas, and courtyards where daily life unfolded. This design was likely defensive, creating a solid exterior wall, but it also fostered a unique and intimate community life. Inside the houses, archaeologists found a world rich with ritual. The homes were kept meticulously clean. Each main room had a hearth and an oven, with raised platforms for sleeping and other activities. But these were also sacred spaces. Many walls were decorated with stunning murals, vivid scenes of hunts, geometric patterns, and depictions of enormous wild bulls, their real horns often set into clay reliefs. Most remarkably, the dead were not separated from the living. The people of Çatalhöyük buried their family members beneath the floors of their own houses. This practice suggests an incredibly strong connection to ancestors, a sense that the family, both living and dead, was the core of society. The house was not just a shelter, but a dynastic home, a center for life, death, and remembrance. What's perhaps most fascinating is what Çatalhöyük lacks. Despite its size, there are no obvious public buildings, no great temples, no palaces for kings or queens. The houses, while varying in size, all follow a similar layout, and studies of skeletons show that men and women had similar diets and social standing. This has led many researchers to believe that Çatalhöyük was a remarkably equal society, organized around family and kin rather than a centralized authority. It presents a powerful vision of a large, complex community that thrived for over a millennium, seemingly without rulers or a formal state. It was a city of equals that challenges our very definition of what a city should be. The agricultural revolution had one consequence that would ripple through every part of human society: the food surplus. With farming providing a reliable and storable source of calories, it was no longer necessary for every single person to spend their life producing food. This new reality allowed for the birth of specialization, a pivotal moment when human society began to diversify. In these growing villages like Jericho and Çatalhöyük, some individuals could now focus their time and energy on developing specific skills. We see the emergence of the first true artisans. Potters learned to shape clay into vessels for storing grain and water, a crucial technology for a settled society. Weavers transformed plant fibers and wool into textiles. And toolmakers reached new heights of artistry and skill. One of the most prized materials of this world was obsidian, a black volcanic glass that could be fractured to create blades of unparalleled sharpness. Obsidian was the high-tech material of its day, perfect for knives, sickles, and arrowheads. But its sources were rare, found only in specific volcanic regions like central Turkey. Archaeologists have found workshops at sites like Çatalhöyük, where craftspeople would expertly knap raw obsidian into beautiful, functional tools. This wasn't just about practical goods. Specialization also extended into social and spiritual realms. While a site like Çatalhöyük seems to have lacked a formal priesthood, the intricate murals and buried figurines suggest certain individuals held important ritual knowledge. In other communities, as villages grew, someone had to manage the surplus, organize communal labor like building a wall, and settle disputes. This laid the foundations for the first leaders and administrators. This division of labor created a new kind of social fabric. Instead of a community where everyone performed the same basic tasks, society was becoming a complex, interdependent network of farmers, craftsmen, traders, and leaders. This economic complexity was a prerequisite for urban life. It fostered innovation, as specialists had time to perfect their techniques, and it created the goods that would fuel the next great transformation: long-distance trade. No village, no matter how successful, was an island. The specialization of labor created not just a variety of goods, but also a variety of needs. A farmer needed a pot for his grain. A potter needed grain to eat. This simple principle of exchange, which started within communities, soon expanded to connect distant settlements in a vast web of trade. The evidence for these ancient trade routes is written in stone, specifically obsidian. Using scientific analysis, archaeologists can match an obsidian artifact to its precise volcanic source. This allows them to map the incredible journeys these materials took. Obsidian from central Turkey has been found at sites all across the Levant, including Jericho, hundreds of miles away. Shells from the Red Sea had been found far inland at Çatalhöyük. These were not casual exchanges. They were part of extensive and organized trade networks that moved goods, ideas, and technologies across the ancient Near East. The routes often followed natural pathways, like rivers and mountain passes, creating the first great commercial highways. Along these routes traveled not just essential commodities like obsidian for tools and salt for preserving food, but also luxury goods. Beautifully crafted jewelry, exotic shells, and perhaps even early forms of beer were exchanged between communities. This trade had profound consequences. It allowed communities to get resources they lacked locally, making them more resilient and prosperous. It also fueled further specialization. A village near a good clay source might become a pottery hub, while one near an obsidian flow became a center for tool production. But perhaps most importantly, trade was a conduit for information. As traders moved from village to village, they carried with them new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of organizing society. The web of trade bound these separate communities into a shared cultural world. It sped up the pace of change, spreading innovations far and wide. These networks were the arteries of the Neolithic world, pumping the lifeblood of commerce and culture that allowed large villages to grow ever larger, richer, and more complex, setting the stage for the first true cities. For thousands of years, in settlements like Çatalhöyük, society appears to have been remarkably equal. But the very forces that allowed these villages to flourish, agricultural surplus, population growth, and trade, also contained the seeds of social inequality. As communities grew larger and more complex, a new social order began to emerge. The management of resources became a critical issue. Who controlled the communal granary? Who organized the maintenance of irrigation canals vital for the crops? Who had the authority to settle land disputes between families? In this context, the role of a leader or big man likely began to take shape. This leadership probably wasn't based on hereditary rule at first, but on persuasion, charisma, and proven ability. The person who was the best farmer, the most successful trader, or the most skilled negotiator might naturally command respect and influence. Wealth, for the first time, became a significant factor. A family with more fertile land, a larger herd of livestock, or a craftsman whose goods were in high demand could accumulate more than their neighbors. This wealth could be traded for other goods, used to support others in times of need, and eventually passed down to the next generation. This is the very beginning of social stratification, the division of society into different levels based on wealth, status, and power. We see evidence of this shift in the archaeological record. While early burials are often simple and similar, in later periods, some graves begin to stand out. A few individuals are buried with more elaborate goods, fine pottery, exotic beads, or weapons hinting at a higher status in life. Architecture also began to change. While Çatalhöyük was a city of similar houses, in other regions, some buildings started to grow larger and more elaborate than others, suggesting the rise of an elite class. This process was accelerated by the rise of organized religion. As spiritual beliefs became more formalized, priestly classes emerged who claimed a special connection to the gods. They often controlled ritual life and, by extension, the community's economic life, managing offerings and surplus from temple storehouses. This fusion of religious and economic power created a potent new form of authority. The equal village of kin was slowly giving way to a more complex, layered society. This was a necessary step towards the city. Managing a population of thousands required a more formal system of governance than kinship ties could provide. The emergence of leaders, elites, and social classes was the creation of a social infrastructure, a framework of power and administration that would become the backbone of the world's first urban civilizations. The line between a very large village and a true city is blurry, but in the late 4th millennium BCE, in the fertile floodplains of southern Mesopotamia, the land of Sumer humanity crossed it decisively. This wasn't just a change in scale. It was a change in kind. Settlements like Uruk transformed from large agricultural towns into something the world had never seen before. A fully fledged city, a vibrant, complex organism that would become the template for urban life for millennia. So what made Uruk different from Çatalhöyük or Jericho? First, there was its staggering size. At its height around 3000 BCE, Uruk may have been home to 50,000 people. It was a metropolis surrounded by a network of smaller towns and villages, all tied to the urban center. Second, Uruk saw the rise of monumental public architecture on an unprecedented scale. The city was dominated by massive temple complexes, built on raised platforms called ziggurats. These were not just places of worship. They were the heart of the city's economy and administration. The temple controlled vast tracts of land, employed armies of laborers, collected surplus grain as taxes, and redistributed it to a legion of priests, bureaucrats, and artisans. The state was born in the shadow of the temple. Third, this new urban complexity required a new technology for management: writing. To keep track of the vast quantities of grain, livestock, and goods flowing through the temple storehouses, Sumerian administrators developed the world's first writing system, cuneiform. It began as a simple system of pictures for accounting, but evolved into a sophisticated script capable of recording laws, literature, and history. Writing was the ultimate tool of urban administration. Finally, Uruk was a city of strangers. Unlike in a village where everyone was related, the city brought together thousands of people from different families and backgrounds. Social organization was no longer based just on who you were related to, but on your profession, your social class, and your role in the state. A new urban identity was forged. The transition was complete. The wandering band had become the farming village. The farming village, through specialization in trade, had become the stratified town. And the town, with its centralized administration, monumental architecture, and writing, had become the city. The Sumerians hadn't just built bigger settlements. They had engineered a new way for humans to live together, creating the complex, dynamic, and often chaotic world of the city that we still inhabit today. This journey from the first tentative steps out of a nomadic life to the bustling streets of Uruk is one of the most incredible stories in human history. It's a story of innovation, adaptation, and the relentless drive to build something lasting. If this journey into the dawn of society has captivated you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have many more journeys into the past to share, uncovering the foundations of our modern world, one ancient civilization at a time. Your support helps us continue to bring these epic stories to life. The gamble our ancestors took over 10,000 years ago to abandon their nomadic ways was a big one. In exchange for the promise of a reliable food supply, they accepted a life of harder labor, new diseases from living in close quarters with animals, and social inequalities that were entirely new. Yet, it was a gamble that paid off in ways they could have never foreseen. From the first mud brick houses of Jericho and Çatalhöyük to the towering ziggurats of Sumer, this transformation laid the essential groundwork for civilization. The simple village, born from the agricultural revolution, became the crucible for nearly every major social innovation. Specialized labor, long-distance trade, formal government, monumental architecture, and the written word. These weren't just new tools or tricks. They were entirely new ways of structuring human life, allowing for levels of cooperation and complexity that were previously unimaginable. Every city on Earth today, every nation, every global trade network, owes its existence to these first daring experiments in communal living. The challenges they faced: how to manage resources, how to organize a diverse population, how to create a shared identity, are the same fundamental challenges we face in our own urban societies. The story of how villages became cities is more than just ancient history. It is our story. It is the story of the birth of the modern world, built brick by brick on foundations laid down at the very dawn of society.